Welcome to the Werewolf Bar. I'm Brian Easton, the author of the Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter series, and this is Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter. Thanks for joining us for a little while this evening. We've got a good show for you, I think. We've got our regular contributors back with us this evening. Tex is back with a brand new episode of Tools of the Trade. Amanda Rogers is here, as well as Dr. T. Broussard, with another installment of his Occult Primer series, Doc Talk Shop. But before we hear from them, let's take a look at our creature of the night. Tonight's bottle actually comes from Dr. T. Broussard, who gifted this to us, and we thank him for it. It is Blue Note Bourbon from Memphis, Tennessee. It bills itself as a single barrel, uncut whiskey, which means that instead of blended mix of bourbons from various barrels, one individual aging barrel was used, and the bourbon is not diluted with water to lower the proof before bottling. So this is a relatively young spirit, only 4 years old, so we'll see how it stands up. To you. So, the first thing to notice about this is the mouthfeel, which is very thick. It's a viscous, pleasant mouthfeel, oily. That may not sound good, but it is. Plus, the flavor is really rich, which I wasn't expecting from a whiskey this young. I figured maybe even with it being uncut, that it would have a green taste to it, like you get sometime with young bourbon. But they managed to avoid that, so that's always a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Again, thanks to Dr. T for making a gift of this creature of the night. Well, yesterday was Valentine's Day, which can be a divisive holiday, generally separating along lines of those who are in love and those who are not. For sweethearts, it's the perfect opportunity to celebrate their romance. And for the rest, well, it's either a Hallmark holiday or it's sour grapes, something they could do without in any event. So here to talk to us a little bit more now about Valentine's Day and to ask a few potentially werewolf-connected questions is Amanda, and Amanda asks.
Hi Brian, hi Internet. Let's jump right to it. It's almost Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day, the old pagan name was Lupercalia, which evokes wolves to me. But get this, the priesthood back then even had a group called the Brothers of the Wolves, or the Luperci. And right around this time of year, they would sacrifice a goat or a dog, and then daub the blood on these Luperci. And they would peel strips from the goat or the dog or whatever they killed, and run around naked, slapping people with them. It's a fertility thing. Very bestial, right? But what I'm wondering is this. All of this Valentine's Day romantic stuff that we've come up with since, is it really just a way to out a beast? Let's think about it for a minute. Give chocolates, right? Chocolates are very bad for dogs. Would they have an effect on someone who has a werewolf physiology? I'm not saying that it would kill them or anything, but it might make them sick. And we give silver lockets and silver rings and what have you. Silver has an effect on wolves, we know that. Flowers, beautiful bunches of enconite, also known as wolfsbane. How about this one? You put wolfsbane oil into a massage oil. Would that inhibit the change, make it slow down? And did the old wolf hunters use any of these tricks? That's what I'm wondering. What are you wondering?
So this is something we don't hear a lot about, maybe because Valentine's Day runs hot or cold with folks, like we talked about. And as we understand it, Valentine's Day originated as a Christian feast day, honoring one or perhaps two early Christian martyrs, both called Saint Valentine, who were both executed in the 3rd century by Emperor Claudius II on February 14th in 2 different years. But as Amanda pointed out, it was a festival of ancient Rome, or there was a festival of ancient Rome observed annually on February 14th as well. The festival was meant to help purify the city and was known originally as Februa, which is where we get the month February, which means purifications or purgings. And along with some of the practices that Amanda mentions with the Lupercalia, young men would draw the names of women from a jar and then couple with the ones that they chose for the duration of the festival, or longer if it turned out to be a good match. In antiquity, the name Lupercalia was believed to share a connection with the ancient Greek festival of the Arcadian Lycaea, which was a wolf festival. So Amanda's hit it right on the head with sounding wolfish to her, because the old Arcadians were known for their veneration of the mountain wolf, and they even had a wolf-like deity named Zagreus who ate raw meat and was the son of Hades. So certain ceremonies of the Lupercalia festival were held at a cave called the Lupercal, where tradition says that Romulus and Remus suckled the she-wolf, the Capitoline wolf, Lupa, who figures prominently into my series as Rhea Silvia Lupa. No spoilers, though, as to who that is. So ostensibly, anyway, the Arcadian tradition devolves into the Roman festival, and then from about the 5th century, the church gets involved, combining St. Valentine's Day with Lupercalia in an attempt to get rid of the pagan rituals, which might sound familiar. To further muddy the waters, around the same time, the Normans celebrated Galatine's Day, Gallatin meaning lover of women, which was probably confused with St. Valentine's Day at some point, due in no small part to the fact that they sound alike. Galatine's Day, Valentine's Day. Fast forward to Chaucer and Shakespeare, who romanticized the day in their works, making it sweeter and more romantic, so it gained popularity throughout Britain, and eventually we end up with the holiday that we have today. But getting to Amanda's questions, firstly, let's remember the werewolves from my novels are considered wolven, which is to say wolf-like, and are not in any way biologically akin to true wolves. Their physiology is demonic, not lupine. And so I don't think chocolate would have any more effect on them than a glass of strychnine. Amanda brings up the idea of aconite, or wolfsbane, as it's popularly known. And this actually comes up in the 3rd book of the series, where Sylvester comes across bowls of dried wolfsbane that has been burned as a part of a werewolf hootenanny, a kind of a wanton orgy of violence and sex. Presumably, this stuff shot intravenously or inhaled for narcotic purposes. And we come to understand that the aconite / wolfsbane does indeed have an effect, or has the effect of a drug on werewolves, though we're not told exactly what that effect is. Now, I don't know if wolfsbane works through the skin, but given Amanda's example of a massage oil laced with this stuff, I would say that if it did absorb through the skin, that by the time the rub down was over with, you'd have a werewolf tripping balls. And I can't help but believe that aconite definitely found its way into the arsenal of some of the old-time werewolf hunters, like Amanda says. One of the problems with being a werewolf hunter, of course, is that there's no school to go to that teaches you how to do it, nor are there any textbooks, nor are there many living examples of mentors. The best you can hope for is for some word of mouth from someone who's been there and knows what they're talking about. And if you don't, then you have trial and error in a trade that doesn't allow much room for either. So thanks for the questions, Amanda. And if you have a question for Amanda to ask, be sure to send her an email at the address shown at the end of her segment. Well, after a couple of months hiatus, we're glad to have Tex Grebner back with us as he presents perhaps one of the oldest weapons in the world, and its application for monster hunting. Here's Tex Grebner with your February edition of Tools of the Trade.
Howdy folks, Tex Grebner here with Whiskey with the Werewolf Hunter, Tools of the Trade. We're going to get biblical. This is a Balearic style shepherd sling. This one's made out of 550 cord. And it's got a split pocket, finger loop, grip knot, and this is a huge force multiplier that has been around for a very, very long time, and a biblically correct monster killer. And it's not hard to figure out, if you've ever been in charge of watching livestock, why the shepherds were so devout and so good with their slings. Because all you've got to do in a pre-technology age is watch the stock, talk to God, and throw rocks around. So if you had nothing better to do with your time than get really good with one of these, the feats of marksmanship of the shepherds in the Bible, namely David, makes plenty of sense. Me, on the other hand, I'm pretty terrible with one, and that's why we're using a lacrosse ball to minimize my liability on this demonstration, because I'll be honest with you, I tied 3 yo-yos together to make a bolos when I was about 6 years old and living in this house that I currently moved back into a while back, and broke that window in my neighbor's garage quite a while ago. So we're going to be using a lacrosse ball rather than, say, golf balls or actual rocks. Actual rocks, silver ore exists in nature, meteoric iron deposits exist in nature. You could sling silver ingots out of this. You can basically, I guess what I'm getting at is, the point of this is that, just like Starship Troopers said, there are no dangerous weapons, only dangerous people. Let's put it this way. This is 550 cord, technically a tactical Balearic sling. If you survive the airstrike, there's going to be plenty of rocks around to fight your way to a rifle with. Now that sounds super lunatic fringe, but we are talking about monster hunting as if it's a serious topic. But this is a huge force multiplier that would allow you, with, let's say, a caveman era of a monster hunter, to actually deliver meteoric iron or silver ore rocks. So I'm not very good at this, but I did manage to get one hit on camera, and no windows were harmed in the filming of this production.
Now, this is an underappreciated and overlooked tool of the trade, if ever there was one. All most people know about slings is either the kind of the slingshot that made from a forked stick and the rubber band that were carried in the back pockets of hooligans back in the day, or that David killed Goliath with a shepherd sling. The fact of the matter is, slingers were, in fact, some of the most feared men on the battlefield in the ancient world, because a good slinger could put a ball of baked clay or a creek rock or a lead bullet right through your forehead. Balearic and Rhodian slingers were especially sought after as specialized mercenary forces in antiquity. In the Old Testament book of Judges, it talks about how there were special forces among the army of Israel, Benjaminites, who could hit a target with their sling within a hair's breadth. And these slingers, whether they were Hebrew or Greek or what have you, would wear tied to their limbs or around their foreheads like a sweatband, a variety of different slings for different ranges and purposes. And of course, the beauty of being a slinger, like Tex points out, is that you're never out of ammunition as long as you've got rocks around. And a good slinger with a chunk of native silver could be devastating to a werewolf, and Tex hit that right on the nose. Plus, you have to take into consideration that this is a completely silent weapon, aside from the little whooshing sound that you hear right before it goes through your skull. It's a fascinating weapon. So that's my dust up, and thank you, Tex, for sharing the segment and for the demonstration as well. And as much as we like to talk about monster hunting weaponry and the martial skills to put them to use, we are equally concerned with the battlefield on the other side of things. Enter Dr. T. Broussard, who is a sensei, but also a veteran practitioner of the occult arts and sciences. He's here with us now to continue discussing different kinds of discarnate entities with this month's installment of Doc Talk Shop.
Hello and welcome to Doc Talk Shop. Today, we have a rare opportunity for our topic of discussion. It is both a discussion of wraiths, that's WRAITHS, and one of my favorite characters in all of the Werewolf Hunter series, the Reverend Blackscrabble, who, like many preachers, started out on one side of the road and changed paths because some people think that, well, God may seldom answer prayer, the devil's always open. And having spent some time in unorthodox ministerial work myself, I can tell you, sometimes convenience can seem to trump articles of conviction. I will assume that most of our viewers are aware of the story of Reverend Blackscrabble and everything he got up to, so we'll get to him in a moment. We'll start with, what is a wraith? A wraith is a type of specter, which is a reference to one of our older episodes, a ghost that has persisted past its time and through malice and alliance with evil has become more than an average ghost. It has become a wraith. A wraith is a ghost devoted to vengeance, specifically. Wraiths are ghosts who typically have violent ends, and so their business after life is violence. Unlike other kinds of ghosts, they can become corporeal brief periods of time. They're often associated with haunts, and just like a haunt has points of intersection between the realm of the living and the dead, wraiths use that function of haunts to become material for brief periods of time. Now, violence in and of itself, being a bad guy, is not enough to become a wraith. Part of what made the Good Reverend a wraith is that he took vows to one paradigm and engaged another paradigm. The black arts, magic, whatever you want to call it. You can't claim to represent one side in the spirit, but then truck with the enemy of the side you're supposed to be working for. You can respect the enemy. You can come to understand the enemy, but to ally with and use the things of the enemy cheapens or weakens the side you're supposed to be representing. So, much like Judas before him, the Good Reverend's dalliances in life, so I'm shut out of heaven and hell both, because he was shut out of heaven for working with witches and such, and shut out of hell because he used the power of hell in some ways against the enemy. And one of the first rules of magic is you may do what you will, but if you're on the path of Satan, you don't stand in the way of hell, basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist. So, that combination of features made the Good Reverend a wraith, and so he is as much a part of the feud as Sylvester. And I dare say that the Good Reverend was sent to Sylvester as a warning to Sylvester of what he might become. And this was also hinted at with the nearly becoming a Wendigo. Interestingly enough, the Algonquin word for Wendigo is Rougarou, very similar to the Cajun word for most people think it was a werewolf, although it's a bit more than that. So, all that being said, wraiths are committed to vengeance. They are damned in respect. In fact, if you're able to fulfill their vengeance, they are not released as much as they are transferred from the earthly realm in which they have some power into the outermost where they have no power at all. They become part of the storm of souls. They awake in the train of lost souls, some people would say. So, here is a real life encounter I had with a wraith. I was in New Orleans. I was standing outside of the old Absent House there, as I had many a night in the past. And all of a sudden, some fog rolled through. And for a moment, I was looking at a monk, full hood, whole shebang, and he was saying prayers. Well, you might ask, well, how I know he's a wraith? Well, First of all, he couldn't have walked there in the amount of time it took the fog to roll in, and no, I didn't hear a step or anything. And he was about 3 to 5 feet. Yeah, I'd say about 4.5 feet away from me. Yeah, I would have seen him walk up. I would have heard him walk up. So he's praying. He notices me. He begins to walk toward me, and I threw up a warning gesture like this. And reminded the good brother, actually, that this was not his time, though it was his place. And I kid you not, same fog rolls in again. He's gone. Not a trace, not a sound. So, here's an example of both a wraith and a haunt. Haunt, in the sense of that ghost has been connected to the old Alvin Palace for as long as I can remember. And when conditions are right, it crosses over from the creepy feeling level of existence to an interactive level of existence. Now, I bring that up to say this. When the Reverend gives Sylvester certain talismans and things like that, they are actual things. Sylvester is able to bring them back with him from the immaterial into the material. That is not something an average ghost can do. That takes something of a wraith's power to accomplish. And fortunately, those types of entities are hard to achieve. In fact, there are entire branches of necromantic magic devoted to the summoning, control, and banishing of wraiths. It's dangerous stuff, truth be told. They can get the job done, but the jobs that they're made for are not pleasant jobs. It begs the question, why use that type of spirits when one can achieve the same ends with healthier means? With the Reverend, it would be interesting to see what would happen if Sylvester kept feeding into his situation, because the more Sylvester invested with the Reverend, the more corporeal and more powerful the Reverend would become, and whether through possession or some other transgression, the Reverend could actually restore himself with enough investment by Sylvester. He could come back to life in a way, although he would not be alive, obviously. He'd be a kind of undead. He would be a resurgent soul, a ghost possessing a body the way a demon would a living soul. That would be interesting. I wonder, in the Werewolf Hunter universe, what the rules for that would be, how that would have to be dealt with. I'm sure Michael Winterfox would have a lot to say about that. Now, Reverend Blacksabel is not as unusual as many would think. His pursuit of black arts and occult power is actually very common among holy men and preachers of various kinds, because if God's real, well, then why not other things as well? And if God's not going to give me what I want, maybe something else will. There's always the temptation. The validation of one system of belief opens the doors to what about other systems? But, if that's real, then what am I else real? It's important to keep in mind that wraiths, while powerful, are subject to general rules of spirits. So if you encounter something like that, being a living person yourself, I would presume, you have the authority of being a living person in that space to take command of that entity. And while entities like that can, quote unquote, show, shaking objects, closing doors, moving things around, noises, scenes, smells. Smells are always fun. These are sensory attacks to make you lose confidence in yourself, and then you become vulnerable to their influence. If you're confident in yourself and your higher power, whatever that might be, even a wraith who's managed to build up quite a lot of power and substance would have no power over you. Blacksabel is able to interact with Sylvester because Sylvester's hatred puts him on the same wavelength as the good Reverend. If the Reverend would persist his given trajectory and he ended up in Tyrus, it would likely be that the good Reverend would find out he was always a demon or a demon spawn and didn't realize it. I say that because the extra oomph it takes to become a wraith indicates some kind of kinship with a non-human entity in life of a more carnal nature than is typically afforded to a preacher. So there's probably some demon blood somewhere in that family or something like that. Now, so after death, the individual becomes a wraith, and once they get to the hell stage of their existence, they are made into an incomplete version of the demon. They'll never make full demon status, but they're slightly above the normal a lot of a larval growth that ends up in hell, which is pretty sorry a lot, to be honest. I mean, everything I've ever learned about such things indicates that souls that end up in that direction, well, there's a reason why it says it grieves the angels in certain scriptures to look into hell. So you'll find that in the Old West and that whole arena of mythology, the figure of the traveling preacher, firebrand, is fairly common. It's a big trope, right along with the Undertaker and the gunslinger and outlaw and Sloan Girl, and all the rest of it. It's part of the whole cast of characters. Um, that's important to this because being a wraith, the Reverend is an embodiment of the age he comes from. His furies, his prejudices, they're all a part of the fabric of his nature. And his power as a wraith is somewhat dependent on that. So he's going to manifest guns, he's going to manifest bullets and so forth, knives. He's not going to be pulling out a katana or a lightsaber. Those things would not be within his purview as a spirit. Now, I will also say that there have been accounts of preachers and so forth going native, taking up native religions, and mingling them with their brand of Christianity. They've come up with some interesting local cults. And so you have folk saints in Hispanic circles and other circles around the world. And all this stuff is its own kind of craft, if you will, its own kind of hoodoo. And so, while the Reverend got in trouble for doing what he did, but it is not all that uncommon. So, always remember, kids, when you're dealing with preachers, when they ask you if you love the Lord, make sure the Lord is, you're clear on the Lord they serve before you can give them any money, anything. Otherwise, you could be investing in the wrong company. This is by far one of my favorite characters in the books, and one of my favorite subjects. Well, the idea of a race being a contributor to the fall of the lineage is interesting because in some circles, werewolfery and necromantic practice are very much connected. So it would not be unusual for a werewolf head to have commerce with such, and most would have made the Reverend an ally, but apparently it never occurred to anyone. Anyway, it's an intense topic, and it's an intense character. I always imagine someone like Christopher Walken or Lance Henriksen playing the good Reverend. That's just my take. So, I'll say good night, and as always, mind the moon.
You know, one of the reasons why I've asked Doc to present these segments is so we can better understand the significance behind what happens in the books. And tonight's presentation is case in point. Because as the doctor and I have both pointed out before, not every discarnate entity is a ghost, and there are fundamental differences between ghosts and spirits and revenants and wraiths, such as the Reverend Blackscrabble. As Doc mentioned, is a vengeful entity, the wraith of a former Shootist preacher who had married a Nuxalk witch, learned much of the black arts through her and taught her what he knew, was ultimately betrayed and murdered by her through the wolves of the Gandalian dynasty. And so he takes an interest in Sylvester as a kind of kindred spirit of vengeance, and does what he can to help him on his quest to kill werewolves, with an eye to one day wiping out the entire lineage. Another thing Doc pointed out was that in interacting with Sylvester, the wraith of Blackscrabble becomes stronger. And Doc sort of ruminates on what would happen if Sylvester had kept on feeding him until he kind of became an undead creature of preternatural flesh. And while I admit I hadn't really considered that when I was writing the story, now that it's been brought up, I can feature a couple of different scenarios. Both involve Sylvester sharing his hatred with this evil spirit, who gladly feeds upon it and grows more powerful until he either becomes a troublesome ally to Sly, and they eventually have to sort things out between them, or like the Wendigo before him, he attempts to take possession of Sylvester's body to enact his vengeance. Both ideas have merit as far as storytelling is concerned, and it would have definitely been an interesting undertaking to see how all that panned out. Instead, Blackscrabble just sort of fades away after a while, and the last time Sylvester sees him is in the dream, where he also sees the spirits of his son and father and others. And what Blackscrabble says to him is something to the effect that I'm out of time at last. Indicating perhaps that he did not get enough sustenance as a wraith, and that he was being permanently relegated to the realm of fever and shadow, the dreams of things. So thank you, Doctor, for bringing this to us, and you are most certainly appreciated. And I want to take just a moment to acknowledge our regular contributors, Amanda, Tex, and Doc, and thank them again for what they bring to the show. Well, I'm closing in on the end of the Winter Fox Journals Book 2. I've been talking with my publishers, and we hope to have the next volume in your hands before summer. I'm right at the end of things, right where I really don't want to mess it up, so I'm kind of taking the last few pages slowly to bring you the best story I possibly can. That's all we have for you tonight. Be sure to check out my autobiography of a werewolf hunter series on Amazon or wherever you buy books online. You can find us on the web at werewolfhunter.com. You want to drop me a message, Brian at werewolfhunter.com. Also remember that my old Facebook page is defunct as of December 2022, and that I have a new page that you can find under the same name, except it is Autobiography of a Werewolf Hunter. The former Facebook page was abbreviated to say Autobiography Werewolf Hunter. This one has the full title in it, so you won't be able to miss it. But if you were subscribed to that old page back in December, which was just a couple of months ago, remember, please head over to the new one and follow it, because the other one is permanently disabled, thanks to the bots and the ass monkeys who work at Facebook. Consider liking and subscribing to this channel if you're so inclined, and we'll meet you back here this time next month. We always aim for the 15th. Thanks for dropping by tonight. We appreciate it. Happy hunting and mind the moon.